The first is this. Jesus replied, the first is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. I have stumped many a godparent at baptism by asking them, which two commandments are these? 3 and 9? 4 and 6? 1 and 8? It's a trick question. It's all of them. They're all of them. The 10 commandments are summarized in these two. Love the Lord your God is the first 3 commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself is the remaining 7. The 10 commandments break down into specific actions how you love. Specifically instruct how that love is done. How do you love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and all your strength? Well, first of all, you have no other gods, and then you keep holy his name, and then you keep holy his day. And how do you love your neighbor as yourself? Well, you start off by not killing him, and then you work up from there. It gets specific. It's how do you love? The commandments are God's revelation of how we fulfill our identity as human beings, specifically our identity as his people. People in relationship with him. And because of that, in relationship with one another. And the fulfillment of that is love. And he makes it clear when Jesus answers the scribe that one is to love God with every aspect of one's being. There is no element, no part of our lives that is not meant to be put to the work of loving God. For we are to love him with all our hearts, all of our emotions, with all of our souls, our spiritual being, with all of our minds. Yes, even our rationality and intellect is made to love God. And with all of our strength, our physical being, our very bodies are directed toward the love of God, into what they are for. And so the first is this, he says, and makes it clear that he who will perfectly fulfill these commandments, he who alone will perfectly fulfill these commandments, reveals that there is no aspect of our being that is not directed toward loving God first. And because of our love of God, loving our neighbor. And it is interesting, this realization that is so clear in those who know Christ, who recognize Christ as the Son of God, and who follow him as the risen Lord. This animates every aspect of our being. In one of my favorite early Christian writings, which we know by name of who got the letter, not who sent it, not the author. It's called the letter to Diognetus. The letter to Diognetus. And it's from the times of the persecution, possibly as early as the mid-2nd century, around 150, but more likely mid to late 3rd century, 250 to 300, while it was still very dangerous to be a Christian, while it was still illegal to be a Christian. This letter is written explaining to an obviously curious pagan what it means to be a Christian. And the author explains, Christians are indistinguishable from other men, either by nationality, language, or customs. They do not inhabit separate cities of their own, or speak a strange dialect, or follow some outlandish way of life. Their teaching is not based upon reveries inspired by the curiosity of men. Unlike some other people, they champion no purely human doctrine. With regard to dress, food, manner of life, in general, they follow the customs of whatever city they happen to be living in, whether it is Greek or foreign. And yet, there is something extraordinary about their lives. They live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. They play their full role as citizens, but labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. Like others, they marry and have children, but they do not expose them. They share their meals, but not their wives. It's interesting for Christians, even then, even at a time when your very life was at risk for being a Christian. What distinguished them, what set them apart, what was clear about them, was their behavior toward their wives, whom they kept and treasured and did not spoil, and their children, whom they did not leave out in the cold to die. For they knew that the first is this: the Lord our God is Lord alone, and all else flowed from that. All else. And that was a threat at that time to the empire, but not to them. So, it is in this context that we consider our responsibilities as citizens. We consider ourselves first as Christians and act to fulfill all of our roles as citizens, as the letter to Diogenes points out, but we do so knowing what is first. And since for most of us here, certainly, and most Christians in general, the question is not to guide and govern and direct policy, but quite frankly, our role of citizenship, our element of judgment in the governance of this country comes down to the simple act of voting. And therefore, voting is an exercise of our moral judgment as Christians. Because of this, the church provides guidance. The bishops of this country have issued very specific directions on what's to be considered from the Doctrine of Faithful Citizenship, acknowledging where we are to look as we prepare to exercise this moral act that is voting. The Church's guidance on these matters is an essential resource for Catholics as they determine whether their own moral judgments are consistent with the gospel and with Catholic teaching. Catholics often face difficult choices about how to vote. This is why it is so important to vote according to a well-formed conscience that perceives the proper relationship among moral goods. A Catholic cannot vote for a candidate who takes a position in favor of an intrinsic evil, such as abortion or racism, if the voter's intent is to support that position. There may be times when a Catholic who rejects a candidate's unacceptable position may decide to vote for that candidate for other morally grave reasons. Voting in this way could be permissible only for truly grave moral reasons. And so, this is a moral act that merits moral reflection. And so, as we approach the election, and I, as my pastor, fulfill my responsibility to you in shedding the light of the gospel and the church on this moral act that you undertake as Christians in our country, you might expect me to respond to the clamor that this election is all about the economy, because you probably know that I have an undergraduate degree in economics. Magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. And I am capable of discourse. But I'm not going to talk to you about that, because that is not my reputation. And many of you, knowing of my concentration in Russian studies, which led me to almost 6 years of work in the field of national security, and some direct personal experience and understanding of what is at work in the world, affecting our nation, and what our nation's responses to that can and might and maybe even should be, would expect me to address the questions of foreign policy that we consider. But no, I don't bring those in here. Because my light to bring to this is on the moral questions, because of what is first for you and for me who know and follow Christ. Abraham Lincoln, who is apparently cool again because there's a movie out about him. Abraham Lincoln, before he was elected president, shortly before, when the issues were really congealing, said in a speech in early 1860, noting how hard the moral insistence was of the partisans of slavery. There was something about it. Mere acquiescence or accommodating them wasn't enough. What was it? He said, silence will not be tolerated. We must place ourselves avowedly with them. What will make them feel safe and unthreatened? He said, this and only this. Cease to call slavery wrong, and join them in calling it right. And this must be done thoroughly, done in acts as well as in words. Hence also the demand that a law be enacted and enforced, suppressing all declarations that slavery is wrong, whether made in politics, in presses, in pulpits, or in private. Those who are attached and those who advocate evil insist on an elimination of discussion, because the truth welcomes discussion, because that is how the truth and goodness are revealed. But evil knows that it is vulnerable, where questions may be asked, and therefore insists on the elimination of all countervailing opinion. And so you can see how evil is at work in our nation, specifically for 40 years now, on the question of abortion, which is an intrinsic evil. It is an intrinsic evil to eliminate a human life, as if that will solve a problem. Running around advocating the Supreme Court decision as if that said it were good, as if that said it were a right. But no, even a court decision doesn't say that. It doesn't say it's good. It just says that the law can't go where you decide which action to take, the good or the evil in that condition. And just it's a matter of truthfulness. A matter of truthfulness. Because unless you're willing to acknowledge that abortion is evil, then it goes that you advocate abortion is good. And so it is that people advocate it as a right that people have and may fulfill, and advocate that it be funded by public funding, and advocate it as a policy. Advocate it as a policy at home, and advocate it and fund it as a policy abroad. Now, the elimination of human life as a solution to problems, personal or public, has a precedent, and it is evil. And to acknowledge that, just simply to acknowledge that, is vital. And refusing to acknowledge that indicates the weakness of the position on which it stands. But what will make them feel safe and unthreatened? This and this alone. Cease to call it wrong, and join them in calling it right. And this must be done thoroughly, done in acts as well as in words. Hence also the demand that suppresses all declarations that is wrong, whether made in politics, in the presses, in pulpits, or in private. And so too, after 40 years of this, again at the very heart of human society, at the very heart of human relationship, comes a new initiative to redefine what pushed aside. Advocated in the name of human rights, equal rights, overlooks the fact that nobody in the past has been excluded from marriage once a certain age was reached. Nobody was excluded from the opportunity to marry. They couldn't marry just anybody. For example, your mom or your dad, that's right out. There are certain limitations on what marriage actually is. There's no limitation on who has a right to marry, but a certain group of people who have put a great deal of money into it and who want to do something else, a very peculiar thing, want our country to call that marriage. And again, demand that that be called marriage and that everyone cease to call anything else exclusively marriage. And again, as Abraham Lincoln recognized, what will make them feel safe and threatened? This and this alone. Cease to call it wrong and join them in calling it right. And this must be done thoroughly, done in acts as well as in words. Hence also the demand that suppresses all declarations that it is wrong, whether made in politics, in presses, in pulpits, or in private. They seek not only approbation, but approval and, in fact, applause. Unless you think that I'd be exaggerating, already in Canada, Christian preachers have been fined severely for preaching Christian morality about marriage. This is where this suppression law will go, to exclude and eliminate those who cling to the reality of marriage. And thus, the last thing, the newest thing, seems to be the elimination of the liberty of the church, to be the church, to do what the church does because of what the church believes, in the name of providing health care. The church is to be forced to do a moral evil, or forbidden to do what she has always done, which is care for the sick, which is teach students. Already, the church is forbidden in many places to handle adoptions. Already, we invented that. Christians were the first ones to recognize the value of a child and the worth of taking them into the family. But already we're excluded because of our unwillingness to relinquish our moral goals. This is the law on the books. You may not realize that the law is passed. Our requests have been explicitly denied for an exception. And when it goes into effect in August, the fines that are prescribed for the church, if she continues to act according to the moral belief that she has, and has had at all times everywhere, if she continues to act that way, will result in fines for the Archdiocese of Washington alone, in the first year alone, of $445 million. It's on the books. It's what's coming. Again, what will make them feel safe and unthreatened? This and this only. Cease to call it wrong. Join them in calling it right. And it must be done thoroughly, done in acts as well as in words. Hence also the demand that suppresses all declarations that it is wrong, whether made in politics, in presses, in pulpits, and in private. So, this is what we know to be true and good and beautiful that is being attacked. Now, morally serious Catholics recognize that no party and no candidate in contemporary America fully embraces Catholic teaching, much less lives one. That's hard enough for all of us. But alert Catholics will take notice when a party or a candidate holds the church and her teaching in contempt. Especially on issues of life and of marriage and of liberty. Now, when I was a student in Rome, I took a class with the Master of Ceremonies to the Holy Father. And when sacristy in the Vatican. Lots of cool, old, shiny things, beautiful things that the Pope uses. And we walked in, and it's been there for millennia, but they said right off the bat, if we're looking around at all the pretty chalices that people have donated to the Pope over the year, king this or queen that, or even a sultan the other, they said, well, there's nothing here before 1800. We said, why not? Well, because in 1798, the French, after the Revolution, attacked and sacked Rome and took everything that was in the sacristy. So it's all gone. Everything valuable was taken by the French. Now, Napoleon, you may not know this, kidnapped the Pope, and he died in captivity. That was Pius VI. And then he sort of held Pius VII when he took him to crowning as emperor. And in the confrontation that they had, because the danger is you kidnap the Pope, you have to listen to him. The Pope said, you want to destroy the church. You'll never succeed. Her priests have been trying for 1,800 years, and we haven't succeeded. And sure enough, the oldest papal tiara in the papal sacristy, this monstrous crown for the Pope, covered in, as I recall, mostly pearls, and gold, and a couple of gemstones. Goes back to about 1810. It's a gift from Napoleon. He figured it out. Church isn't going to go away. Church isn't going to go away. He figured that out. And this we need to remember. Whatever happens, the church will survive. Whatever persecution or applause comes, the church will survive. And we need to know this. We need to remember this. This is our identity. Now, it's not about outcomes. What happens? I'm not about to affect an outcome. I'm talking to you about your moral act in the face of the living God who has revealed himself to you and to me. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, crucified, died, and raised from the dead. This is the fact to which we cling. This is the truth which we embrace. This is what guides and defines our lives. This is what is first. And to recognize and realize that and respond affects everything we do. And so it isn't about outcomes, it's about the moral acts of Christians. How we live in this country that we are just passing through. Your moral actions, which is a response to the living God, who has made himself known to you. The church will survive, whatever comes. And we will survive if we are faithful, whatever comes. The letter to Diognetus, again, recognizes, to speak in general terms, we may say that the Christian is to the world what the soul is to the body. As the soul is present in every part of the body, while remaining distinct from it, so Christians are found in all the cities of the world, but cannot be identified with the world. The first is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. Moses spoke to the people, saying, fear the Lord your God, and keep throughout the days of your lives all the statutes and commandments which I enjoin on you, and thus have long life. Hear then, Israel, and be careful to observe them, that you may grow and prosper the more, in keeping with the promise of the Lord, the God of your fathers. And this Tuesday, it's not a matter of anything we're talking about in the newspapers. It's really a question for you and for me and for all Christians of which